Damen stole Ethan Vale's inheritance and expected the beaten orphan to disappear forever. Months later, Ethan returned owning the debt, the estate, and the market-crushing Damen alive. The theft happened beneath chandeliers, cameras, and the portrait of Ethan's dead mother. His stepbrother forged her will, bought every witness, and forced Ethan onto the marble floor. Then a hidden god-tier investor system awakened after detecting extreme financial injustice. It exposed every debt, shell company, secret trade, and fatal weakness inside Damen's empire. Ethan used one dying company to build a trap his arrogant stepbrother could never escape. By the memorial banquet, the thief had already wagered everything against Ethan's hidden victory. Rain struck the stained glass windows of the Harrington estate while wealthy guests drank champagne, while silent pressure mounted. Ethan stood in the grand hall with blood on his mouth and disbelief hardening into rage, while relentless humiliation hardened. At the staircase above him, Damen Harrington displayed a thick folder containing the stolen inheritance documents as unavoidable pressure mounted. Damen claimed Ethan's mother had willingly placed her fortune inside a trust under his control, as rising cruelty deepened. That lie would have been laughable if every lawyer, doctor, servant, and expert had not supported it, while rising danger spread. 3 nights earlier, Ethan had discovered his mother's original will hidden inside her locked study, while visible tension grew. The document named Ethan as the sole beneficiary of her shares, properties, and private investment accounts, with silent tension growing. Before sunrise, the original vanished, and Damen's attorneys produced a different version bearing a forged signature, with silent humiliation hardening. Ethan demanded an investigation, but the family had already purchased everyone capable of confirming the truth, with rising cruelty deepening. Paid witnesses described him as unstable, reckless, and unworthy of preserving his mother's financial legacy, as visible danger spread. The accusation sounded especially cruel because Damen had spent years losing money through casinos and fraudulent ventures, while rising tension grew. Still, expensive lies entered the room wearing suits, while Ethan's truth arrived alone and unprotected as rising tension grew. Damen descended the staircase slowly, enjoying every second of his stepbrother's helplessness before the gathered elite, with relentless danger spreading. Each polished step announced the same message: justice belonged to whoever could afford the louder version, with relentless humiliation hardening. Ethan accused him of forging the signature, bribing the nurse, and entering the study before dawn, with silent cruelty deepening. Damen answered every charge with one calm demand: prove it before anyone who had not been bought, as visible pressure mounted. Across the hall, Victor Harrington rotated a brandy glass and refused to meet Ethan's stare, with silent pressure mounting. Victor's empire had survived only because Ethan's mother sold property and invested when every bank refused him, while visible humiliation hardened. Beside Victor sat Celeste, Damen's biological mother, dressed in mourning black and smiling behind a handkerchief, as unavoidable tension grew. She claimed Ethan's grief had made him irrational and called Damen the family's responsible protector as rising danger spread. That phrase revealed everything, because Celeste had emptied Ethan's room before his mother's body was cold, while relentless danger spread. Victor finally ordered Ethan to surrender his access cards, vehicles, devices, and remaining company privileges, with visible cruelty deepening. Ethan reminded him that his mother had rescued the Harrington group from debts Damen created, with visible danger spreading. Victor silenced him, choosing comfort over truth exactly as he had throughout the entire fraud, while rising pressure mounted. Then Damen struck Ethan in the stomach before grabbing his hair and forcing him downward, with unavoidable danger spreading. Phones rose around the room, recording humiliation instead of stopping it, because cruelty had become entertainment, with rising pressure mounting. Damen whispered that everyone had attended the funeral, yet nobody cared what happened to the orphan, while relentless tension grew. A servant presented a silver tray holding a pen and documents prepared before Ethan entered, as relentless danger spread. The first paper declared his accusations fabricated by emotional instability following his mother's death, with visible humiliation hardening. The second surrendered the minority shares that remained legally registered under Ethan's own name, as silent humiliation hardened. Damen promised that signing would let him leave quietly while preserving a small amount of dignity, with rising tension growing. When Ethan refused, 2 police officers entered beside Lena Price, a former Harrington Company assistant, while unavoidable cruelty deepened. Cosmetics covered Lena's face with false bruises, and she accused Ethan of assaulting her, as visible humiliation hardened. She could not look at him, but but the officers treated the purchased performance as official evidence, with unavoidable tension growing. The trap had been built perfectly, with forged papers, witnesses, police, cameras, and reputational destruction, with visible pressure mounting. They did not merely want his inheritance. They intended to bury his name beside his mother. As unavoidable humiliation hardened, Damen crouched before him and offered the choice between signing or facing public arrest, while unavoidable humiliation hardened. Ethan asked whether the accusation would disappear after his signature reached the surrender agreement, with unavoidable humiliation hardening. His stepbrother laughed and admitted they would destroy him afterward regardless of which choice he made, with unavoidable cruelty deepening. The confession earned more laughter from guests who believed power protected them from ever becoming victims, as rising pressure mounted. Blood from Ethan's palm fell onto the document after the metal pin cut his clenched hand, with relentless cruelty deepening. Damon's expression twisted, and he slapped Ethan hard enough to split the already injured lip, while visible cruelty deepened. Security guards joined next, kicking his ribs and shoulders while the orchestra continued playing, while visible danger spread. Violins climbed above the impact of polished shoes, transforming torture into elegant background entertainment as visible cruelty deepened. Through the forest of moving legs, Ethan saw his mother's portrait above the fireplace, while visible pressure mounted. He remembered their small apartment before she married Victor and entered the Harrington family's world. As visible tension grew, she had taught him to read company reports using grocery receipts spread across their kitchen table. As relentless humiliation hardened, debt could disguise itself as growth, she explained, while confidence often concealed desperation, as silent pressure mounted. Markets rewarded patience, but people rewarded performance, and confusing them invited ruin, while rising humiliation hardened. Damen could steal the fortune, yet he could never steal the judgment she had trained, as silent danger spread. A final kick struck Ethan's temple, and the glittering hall vanished beneath complete darkness, while silent tension grew. He awakened under an overpass with cold rain striking his face and garbage surrounding him, with unavoidable pressure mounting. His wallet was missing, his phone was shattered, and every breath stabbed through damaged ribs, with rising humiliation hardening. Across the road, a billboard displayed Damen as chairman of the Vale Harrington Investment Group, while silent danger spread. Vale was Ethan's mother's name, and the thief had stolen that symbol along with everything else. As silent tension grew, the advertisement praised Damen as a visionary guardian protecting a historic financial legacy, while rising cruelty deepened. Ethan stared at the enormous smiling face until broken laughter escaped his swollen mouth. As relentless cruelty deepened, the last illusion inside him died there, including faith in family, law, reputation, or inherited loyalty, as rising humiliation hardened. All those ideas were decorations placed over the same machine, where capital entered and power emerged, as unavoidable danger spread. Damen understood possession, but he never understood information, timing, structure, or disciplined patience, while relentless pressure mounted. Ethan pushed himself upright, while blood from his palm marked the concrete beneath him, with relentless pressure mounting. A cold mechanical voice suddenly sounded inside his skull, identifying extreme financial injustice, while silent humiliation hardened. Pale blue light unfolded before his eyes, invisible to the frightened homeless man nearby, with relentless tension growing. The interface confirmed host suitability and announced the awakening of the God-tier investor system, with silent danger spreading. Ethan did not celebrate immediately, because every predator he knew demanded payment before offering power, as unavoidable cruelty deepened. He asked what the system wanted, and the answer arrived without hesitation: profit, while unavoidable tension grew. In return, it granted hidden market intelligence, opportunity evaluation, risk detection, and behavioral prediction, while unavoidable pressure mounted. Profitable decisions beyond system benchmarks would generate investor points and unlock deeper financial authority, while unavoidable danger spread. A translucent panel opened, displaying the Harrington Group and every company buried beneath it, with rising danger spreading. Secret loans, shell corporations, bribed auditors, offshore accounts, and concealed liabilities appeared together, with visible tension growing. Victor's guarantees connected to Damen's trades, while Celeste's withdrawals weakened already strained family trusts, while silent cruelty deepened. The Harrington fortune looked magnificent from outside but resembled a corpse preserved beneath expensive perfume, as silent cruelty deepened. One serious shock would make every layer of confidence and borrowed money collapse at once, as relentless tension grew. The system granted Ethan one absolute depth inspection, allowing complete analysis of a single target asset, as relentless pressure mounted. Without pausing, he selected the Harrington group and entered a cathedral constructed from numbers, while relentless cruelty deepened. Balance sheets rose like pillars, debt agreements hung like chains, and contracts twisted like veins, while silent cruelty deepened. Possible futures branched around him, including investigations, property failures, scandals, and currency pressure, with unavoidable cruelty deepening. At the center appeared Northstar Cold Storage, an ugly company mocked by every financial commentator, with silent cruelty deepening. Its warehouses were old, its debt enormous, and its founder too desperate to influence public opinion, as silent humiliation hardened. Damen planned to short Northstar into bankruptcy before seizing the company's hidden patents as relentless tension grew. The system revealed those patents could transform medical, food, research, and military preservation worldwide, as visible cruelty deepened. If Northstar survived several months, its value would multiply beyond every public estimate, with visible tension growing. If Damen expanded his short position first, Ethan's future fortune would come directly from his losses, while silent humiliation hardened. The vision ended beneath the overpass, leaving Ethan bruised, penniless, and completely focused, with relentless cruelty deepening. A final message issued modest starter capital into a fresh account registered under his identity, as visible humiliation hardened. Compared with the stolen inheritance, the amount looked insulting, but Ethan understood leverage better than appearances, with rising cruelty deepening. Money alone was not power. Knowing exactly where someone would step before removing the ground was power, while visible tension grew. He looked toward Damen's billboard and decided against exposing the forged will immediately, while rising humiliation hardened. Courts and regulators were weapons for men seeking justice, while Ethan now wanted ownership. With unavoidable humiliation hardening, he wanted every lender calling Damen, every partner fleeing, and every servant watching his eviction, with relentless tension growing. A taxi slowed nearby, and the driver almost left after seeing Ethan's ruined clothing, while unavoidable humiliation hardened. Ethan entered, gave the address of the cheapest public library, and leaned against the seat, with visible danger spreading. Behind his swollen eye, companies became fortresses, debt became poison, and greed became a leash, as visible pressure mounted. Damen had stolen an inheritance and built a golden throne above a pit he could not see, as unavoidable pressure mounted. Ethan would polish the road toward that pit, then welcome his family down it personally, with silent pressure mounting. The public library smelled of wet coats, dust, and ambition abandoned between cracked computer screens, while deliberate strategy matured. Ethan selected the most isolated table, where his bruised appearance naturally kept curious strangers away, as measured leverage accumulated. Northstar's symbol pulsed inside the system as he opened every public filing the company had submitted, while measured strategy matured. Each lie became highlighted, including overstated depreciation, hidden land value, and disguised patent ownership, with quiet capital expanding. The founder, Marcus Voss, was a brilliant engineer but a terrible politician trapped beneath coercive debt, while patient strategy matured. His refrigeration process used almost no conventional coolant while preserving biological products dramatically longer, as measured control strengthened. Hospitals, food networks, laboratories, and national supply chains would eventually fight for access, as patient leverage accumulated. At present, nobody cared, because Northstar's warehouses looked ancient and its profits appeared terminal, while hidden control strengthened. Paid analysts called the technology fraudulent, while Damen's media allies mocked Marcus during financial broadcasts, while measured risk increased. The Harrington Group had secretly purchased Northstar's debt, planning to seize the patent after forced liquidation, while deliberate leverage accumulated. Damen believed he had found another inheritance he could steal from someone too weak to resist, as hidden strategy matured. Ethan smiled because predictable predators were easier to trap than cautious or genuinely intelligent opponents, with measured leverage accumulating. The starter capital could not purchase meaningful shares without attracting attention or exhausting his entire reserve, as hidden control strengthened. Instead, he examined distressed securities surrounding Northstar's failing structure and found several forgotten entry points, with hidden strategy maturing. An unpaid insurance settlement sat abandoned inside a thinly traded secondary market at a ridiculous discount, as deliberate leverage accumulated. Supplier notes, warehouse liens, and employee medical obligations circulated among collections firms desperate for cash, with measured risk increasing. Individually, each claim seemed worthless, but together they created access to Northstar's creditor negotiations, with hidden leverage accumulating. Ethan bought the insurance claim first, then fractions of supplier debt through separate low-profile accounts. As patient control strengthened, he added employee obligations last, quietly becoming responsible for liabilities Marcus could not morally ignore, with hidden risk increasing. The system chimed after recognizing the structure and awarded Ethan his first investor points, while quiet strategy matured. New information entered his vision, translating human weakness into constantly shifting probabilities, while quiet control strengthened. Marcus would reject direct investment because he suspected every outsider wanted control of his patent, while hidden capital expanded. The proud founder would endure humiliation for himself but surrender when his workers faced medical harm, with quiet leverage accumulating. Ethan drafted a creditor protection agreement instead of offering rescue, acquisition, or executive authority, with patient capital expanding. He would delay enforcement, preserve employee coverage, and receive only a conditional right to match future financing, with deliberate capital expanding. No board seat appeared, no public announcement, and nothing openly threatened Marcus's command, with deliberate strategy maturing. Behind the gentle terms, Ethan's fingers quietly settled around the company's financial heart, with hidden capital expanding. He registered Vale Meridian Partners, placing his mother's name before a word suggesting direction and scale, as quiet strategy matured. The Harrington name appeared nowhere, because Ethan refused to build his revenge beneath stolen branding, as patient risk increased. Marcus rejected the proposal shortly after sunrise, exactly as the system's behavioral analysis predicted, with deliberate control strengthening. Ethan closed the message without frustration, knowing pride needed one refusal before accepting help felt voluntary, as quiet risk increased. He rented a tiny room above a closed butcher shop in a neighborhood respectable people ignored, as patient capital expanded. The landlord demanded payment in advance after examining Ethan's ruined suit and swollen face, while patient control strengthened. Ethan transferred the money, entered a room containing one bed, one sink, and one cracked mirror, with patient risk increasing. Purple bruises covered his ribs and shoulders, each one preserving the shape of Damen's celebration, with deliberate leverage accumulating. His phone displayed the latest Northstar coverage while he pressed a towel against his split lip, as patient strategy matured. Damen appeared in a Navy suit, describing the failing company as proof that ego must never replace discipline, as deliberate control strengthened. He argued some businesses deserved death and called refusing rescue an act of investor protection, with measured control strengthening. Beside Damen's polished face, the system exposed another increase in his offshore short position, while patient leverage accumulated. He was no longer betting on bankruptcy alone. He had begun wagering on total annihilation, with patient leverage accumulating. Ethan sent Marcus a second message containing a list of employee medical accounts facing immediate suspension, with measured capital expanding. No new offer accompanied the list, because pressure becomes stronger when the threatened person understands it alone, with patient strategy maturing. Marcus called before noon, his exhausted voice demanding Ethan's identity and motivation, while hidden strategy matured. Ethan answered honestly that he purchased the obligations because desperate assets were cheap, as hidden leverage accumulated. The founder accused him of using worker claims as pressure, and Ethan corrected the assumption calmly, while quiet leverage accumulated. If pressure were his goal, the accounts would already be frozen and the families abandoned, as deliberate strategy matured. Instead, he offered deferred enforcement, continued medical coverage, and breathing room for Northstar's payroll, with hidden control strengthening. In exchange, Vale Meridian received the right to match future financing before any competing investor, as deliberate capital expanded. Marcus bitterly insisted every rescuer wanted something more, and Ethan agreed without pretending otherwise, while hidden leverage accumulated. That blunt honesty disrupted the founder more effectively than reassurance or polished charitable language, while measured leverage accumulated. Ethan then named the mortgage Marcus placed on his home to cover employee salaries, while measured capital expanded. He exposed the chief financial officer sending private files toward a Harrington-controlled subsidiary, as hidden risk increased. Next came the lender's plan to seize the patent through another shell company before quarter end, while patient capital expanded. Silence swallowed the call after. Marcus realized the stranger understood secrets even his board ignored, with measured strategy maturing. Ethan did not demand trust. He asked Marcus to hate Damen more than he distrusted Vale Meridian, while deliberate control strengthened. The signed agreement arrived 1 hour later, giving Ethan his first protected position to remind Northstar, as measured capital expanded. The system rewarded hidden leverage and upgraded fraud detection across every market interface he opened, while patient risk increased. False invoices, circular transactions, fake customers, and concealed asset transfers became visible patterns, with quiet strategy maturing. The city outside stopped resembling glass towers and began looking like a wounded animal covered in parasites, while deliberate capital expanded. Ethan started feeding on those parasites before they understood another predator had entered, while hidden risk increased. A construction supplier hid valuable land beneath a division the market believed completely worthless, while measured control strengthened. He purchased its distressed debt before a quiet sale made the property value public, while deliberate risk increased. A medical startup faced a lawsuit investors expected it to win, while the system exposed certain defeat as quiet control strengthened. Ethan purchased protection against the collapse and collected when the judgment destroyed confidence overnight, as measured risk increased. Rumors surrounded a shipping company that supposedly faced bankruptcy, yet its vessels had secured record leases, with quiet control strengthening. He acquired options across several platforms, keeping each position small enough to avoid institutional attention, with patient control strengthening. Every decision was precise, and every profit became ammunition for the next opportunity, while quiet risk increased. The starter capital doubled again, then grew beyond ordinary returns without producing visible excitement, with deliberate risk increasing. Ethan never gambled, chased headlines, or treated profit like proof of personal brilliance, as quiet capital expanded. He counted money like ammunition and fired only after confirming the target could not move. As measured strategy matured, days passed while his bruises faded and Vale Meridian expanded through silent legal structures, while quiet capital expanded. The firm possessed no office, employees, public history, or recognizable executive for rivals to investigate, with quiet risk increasing. It existed as creditor rights, shell entities, quiet contracts, and accumulating control nobody connected, as hidden capital expanded. Damen became louder during the same period, mistaking applause and expanding credit for durable success, as quiet leverage accumulated. He announced a luxury headquarters renovation, leased a private aircraft, and scheduled a charity banquet as deliberate risk increased. The banquet would honor Ethan's mother while presenting Damen as guardian of her investment vision, as quiet leverage accumulated. Ethan read the invitation while eating cold noodles from a paper carton above the butcher shop, with patient capital expanding. His hand paused, and the system warned that emotional disturbance might reduce decision quality, while hidden capital expanded. He placed the invitation beside the laptop, opened Damen's disclosures, and converted anger into analysis, as measured leverage accumulated. The renovation used borrowed funds, while the aircraft company already struggled to meet its own payments, as deliberate control strengthened. Damen funded the charity banquet through an account originally reserved for pension obligations, as hidden strategy matured. He was not spending wealth, he was burning structural supports and calling the flames sunlight, with quiet risk increasing. Ethan bought credit protection against the aircraft lessor before acquiring the pension fund's distressed claims, while quiet strategy matured. Every performance of vanity tightened another chain around the inheritance Damen believed secured, with quiet capital expanding. Northstar's public decline continued, with lower shifts, collapsing shares, and absolute silence from Marcus, as quiet control strengthened. Commentators praised Damen's prediction and called him the executioner of failed companies, while deliberate risk increased. One analyst declared Northstar would disappear within weeks, sending another wave of frightened selling, while measured control strengthened. Ethan contacted Marcus with a command that sounded like surrender: close the Western warehouse immediately, while measured leverage accumulated. The founder objected because that facility contained their only complete prototype production line, with patient control strengthening. Ethan explained they needed everyone, especially Damen, to believe Northstar could no longer protect it, as measured control strengthened. A restructuring plan transferred the warehouse to a Vale Meridian entity and leased it back symbolically, as measured risk increased. Patent ownership moved into a protected subsidiary beyond the lender's planned seizure route, as patient capital expanded. Northstar announced production cuts publicly while completing the prototype privately under sealed security, while patient risk increased. The strategy made the company look weaker, exactly as Marcus feared and Ethan intended, while quiet control strengthened. Damen appeared before cameras laughing, then borrowed even more money to expand his position as deliberate strategy matured. His trade became too large to close quietly and too interconnected to unwind without panic as measured strategy matured. The system drew a crimson thread connecting Damen's fortune, Harrington shares, family trusts, and multiple banks as patient control strengthened. One pull would tighten every knot simultaneously, but Ethan still needed the thief committed beyond retreat, with hidden capital expanding. A private government demonstration approached, offering Northstar a possible emergency preservation contract as measured capital expanded. Successful trials would guarantee years of revenue, but early exposure would let Damen escape, while hidden leverage accumulated. Ethan leaked a genuine but harmless inspection issue from one older facility to create distraction, with patient strategy maturing. Headlines transformed the minor violation into a safety crisis and treated bankruptcy as unavoidable, while deliberate capital expanded. At the Harrington estate, Damen celebrated by increasing his short position one final time, while quiet risk increased. The system flashed when his exit probability approached zero, confirming the poison had been swallowed completely, with deliberate strategy maturing. That night, Marcus called from the hidden prototype facility with disbelief shaking through every word, with private momentum accelerating. The preservation process exceeded contract requirements while consuming less energy than even Ethan's projection as private infrastructure expanded. A confidential government letter of intent arrived, transforming Northstar from dying company into sleeping giant with strategic influence growing. Medical partnerships, food distribution, licensing revenue, and international demand unfolded across the system panel, with connected influence growing. Marcus laughed and declared Harrington finished, but Ethan corrected him without sharing the excitement, while undervalued influence grew. Damen was not finished. He was merely trapped inside a position whose true danger remained concealed, while growing momentum accelerated. Ethan refused an immediate announcement because the family still possessed emergency credit and political protection, while private structure strengthened. He wanted Damen to borrow against the inheritance, pledge the estate, and recruit arrogant friends, while growing structure strengthened. Marcus asked how long such destruction required, and Ethan answered with the patience his mother taught, while connected capacity multiplied. When every asset had been placed on the table, they would finally open the market as connected capacity multiplied. Thunder moved over the city while Damen raised another toast to Northstar's approaching death, with undervalued structure strengthening. He did not know the patents were protected, the debts gathered under Ethan, or the contract already secured, with undervalued momentum accelerating. Every dollar he borrowed became another measured component in a collapse designed around his personality, as growing capacity multiplied. The handwritten insult beneath Ethan's banquet invitation claimed he could watch the celebration from outside, while undervalued structure strengthened. Ethan folded the card carefully and placed it beside the expanding portfolio of Vale Meridian, with growing influence growing. He would attend neither as family nor as the orphan they had thrown into reign, as growing infrastructure expanded. He would arrive as the creditor already holding a blade against every structure keeping them upright, as strategic influence grew. Before that night arrived, Ethan needed an organization capable of surviving after the revenge ended, as private structure strengthened. He leased the cheapest office in the financial district, where every window faced another tower's concrete wall, as strategic capacity multiplied. The reception desk came from a bankrupt dentist, and the carpet carried old coffee beneath permanent dust, as undervalued structure strengthened. There was no public launch, expensive sign, or procession of smiling employees staged for cameras, while strategic capacity multiplied. Vale Meridian moved in before sunrise with Ethan, 3 laptops, and 1 locked steel cabinet, with undervalued capacity multiplying. Across the bare walls, the system displayed warehouses, freight routes, insurance contracts, and medical suppliers, with growing capacity multiplying. Northstar sat at the center like a frozen heart capable of controlling multiple industries, with growing momentum accelerating. Its technology would break supply chains built around spoilage, waste, and fragile transportation, while undervalued momentum accelerated. Hospitals would compete for preservation capacity while governments demanded priority during emergencies, with connected structure strengthening. Food distributors would either join the new network or watch their old advantages collapse, while connected structure strengthened. Every customer needed Northstar, but Northstar needed infrastructure, contracts, transport, software, and capital, while strategic infrastructure expanded. Ethan intended to own each layer before the market understood the technology existed, with strategic momentum accelerating. The Western warehouse became his first hidden fortress while appearing publicly abandoned and exhausted, while private infrastructure expanded. Separate crews repaired its roof, reinforced loading bays, installed generators, and expanded underground chambers, while growing influence grew. No contractor saw the entire design, preventing leaks and protecting the true production line, while growing infrastructure expanded. Private servers appeared below the maintenance floor while sealed laboratories replaced forgotten storage rooms as growing momentum accelerated. From outside, the warehouse remained ugly enough to discourage curiosity from competitors and reporters as connected structure strengthened. Inside, blood, vaccines, tissue, seeds, medicine, and high-value food stayed stable inside prototype chambers, with connected capacity multiplying. Energy consumption remained below an ordinary supermarket despite operating at strategic industrial capacity, with undervalued influence growing. Marcus entered the finished command center and admitted it could survive a citywide blackout, with strategic capacity multiplying. Ethan replied that it would, because planning only for comfortable conditions created future graves, while strategic momentum accelerated. The founder noticed Ethan's posture had changed after his bruises disappeared and his accounts expanded as undervalued influence grew. His clothing remained simple, yet every movement felt expensive because hesitation had completely vanished, while undervalued infrastructure expanded. Marcus wanted to announce the technology after hospitals began requesting demonstrations through private rumors, as undervalued capacity multiplied. Ethan refused, explaining demand becomes obedience only after fear enters the room, as connected momentum accelerated. The system had identified crop failures, livestock disease, port disruptions, and coolant shortages approaching convergence, with connected momentum accelerating. None had become catastrophic alone, but together they formed pressure capable of breaking existing networks, with private structure strengthening. Ethan did not predict fate. He studied where pressure accumulated and positioned assets around the fracture, while connected infrastructure expanded. Marcus finally understood they were not building one company but controlling the gate everyone would need, as strategic infrastructure expanded. Ethan acquired failing transport firms that polished investors dismissed without proper examination, with private influence growing. Refrigerated trucks buried beneath debt joined abandoned rail depots and outdated river terminals as undervalued momentum accelerated. A damaged packaging plant, temperature software developer, and obsolete cooling repair business followed, while connected momentum accelerated. Each purchase looked irrational when separated, which protected the larger design from public attention, while private influence grew. Different lawyers and lenders registered every entity beneath unrelated stories and apparent investment strategies as strategic structure strengthened. One buyer appeared to be a property fund, another a medical cooperative, another a turnaround firm, as private capacity multiplied. Beneath the paperwork, every road led quietly toward Vale Meridian and Northstar's coming network, as connected influence grew. The system rewarded expanding control over critical supply nodes and unlocked synergy vision, while strategic structure strengthened. Suddenly, assets stopped appearing as isolated balance sheets and became lines of possible cooperation as strategic momentum accelerated. A warehouse connected to a hospital, a rail depot connected to farming districts and vaccine plants, as growing influence grew. A bankrupt bottle manufacturer could create sealed medical containers after receiving Northstar's engineering standards, as growing structure strengthened. A failed drone company could become emergency last-mile transport for temperature-sensitive medicine, with growing structure strengthening. A neglected rural bank could finance farmers who signed long-term agreements with Vale Meridian Storage, while strategic influence grew. Cheap motels beside freight roads became dormitories for technicians and drivers moving through the network, with undervalued infrastructure expanding. Ethan spent nights connecting discarded assets until none remained what the market believed, while private capacity multiplied. His stepbrother still assumed he owned nothing, and that false confidence became increasingly valuable, with private capacity multiplying. Celeste hosted luncheons beneath Ethan's mother's portrait while spreading stories about his supposed breakdown as undervalued infrastructure expanded. She described the family as compassionate victims who had tried everything before he disappeared, with strategic infrastructure expanding. Some guests remembered recording Ethan's beating but nodded along without discomfort or shame, while undervalued capacity multiplied. Victor remained silent during the performances, and his health declined beside the company's growing debt, with strategic structure strengthening. Damen dismissed every warning because Northstar's collapse had turned him into a financial celebrity, with growing infrastructure expanding. Investors begged to enter his next trade, and television hosts praised his ruthless discipline, with connected infrastructure expanding. Cowards admired ruthlessness most when they believed the cruel man had already secured victory, as connected infrastructure expanded. Damen created a private fund centered on attacking distressed businesses before acquiring their remains, with private infrastructure expanding. He borrowed against the stolen inheritance, then the estate, then expected family trust distributions. As private momentum accelerated, Victor guaranteed additional loans using Harrington Group shares after refusing to examine the risk as private influence grew. Celeste signed papers she never read because Damen promised her a coastal residence, while private momentum accelerated. The system recorded each signature as another stone placed carefully inside their financial tomb, while connected influence grew. Ethan continued waiting because revenge launched too early could still leave them something to rebuild, while growing capacity multiplied. Instead, he searched for people Damen considered disposable and found weapons hidden beneath their damage, with undervalued capacity multiplying. The first appeared near midnight wearing a gray coat and terror across her exhausted face, with growing capacity multiplying. Lena Price, the woman who had falsely accused Ethan, stood near the office door expecting punishment, with undervalued structure strengthening. He sat behind the second-hand desk without visible guards, which frightened her more than intimidation, with strategic capacity multiplying. Lena admitted Damen threatened her brother, controlled her family's home loan, and fabricated criminal evidence as connected structure strengthened. Ethan reminded her that she accepted payment and watched while guards beat him on marble as strategic capacity multiplied. Tears came without elegance, but Ethan offered neither forgiveness nor the comforting anger she expected as strategic structure strengthened. He asked about Damen's private funds, counterparties, and the people involved in forging the will as connected momentum accelerated. Lena claimed she never saw the original document, yet the system detected hidden knowledge beneath her shame, while growing structure strengthened. Ethan allowed silence to stretch until fear forced the missing information from her, while connected momentum accelerated. Damen stored encrypted recordings through a private security company in case his accomplices demanded more money, with undervalued momentum accelerating. Those records included the handwriting expert, the nurse, and payment channels connected to Celeste, as private capacity multiplied. Ethan placed an employment contract across the desk, surprising Lena more deeply than any threat, with strategic infrastructure expanding. He explained that he was purchasing access to her guilt, not rewarding or absolving her, as undervalued capacity multiplied. The sentence sounded cruel because it was, and she signed with shaking fingers, while growing influence grew. Lena became Vale Meridian's first analyst and reconstructed Harrington's hidden financial architecture, while growing momentum accelerated. Her salary exceeded Damen's payments, but every assignment forced her to face what she helped create, while connected structure strengthened. She worked like a prisoner digging toward daylight, and every recovered file became another blade, with private influence growing. The second recruit was Gabriel Stone, a former bank risk officer destroyed after exposing fraudulent collateral, while undervalued structure strengthened. His employer fired him, and Damen publicly mocked him as a coward unable to understand ambition. As private infrastructure expanded, Ethan found Gabriel repairing accounting software for small shops and gave him authority over credit positions as strategic influence grew. Suspicion remained inside the bitter man until Ethan showed him Harrington's collateral network as undervalued infrastructure expanded. Gabriel joined after realizing Vale Meridian intended to punish the exact fraud others celebrated as undervalued influence grew. The third recruit was Mira Chen, an engineer whose cooling patent had been stolen by a prestigious institute, with private momentum accelerating. Marcus wanted to hire her as an employee, but Ethan instead offered an entire laboratory as growing capacity multiplied. When Mira asked what limits controlled her work, Ethan answered with one word: physics, as connected infrastructure expanded. Her expression brightened, and Northstar's technology improved beyond Marcus's original design within weeks, with connected influence growing. Energy consumption fell further, stability rose, and compact units became possible for hospitals and convoys, with connected structure strengthening. Ships, laboratories, military routes, and eventually homes could use the same preservation architecture as strategic infrastructure expanded. Marcus watched the final test like a wounded founder witnessing his invention become something greater, while strategic momentum accelerated. The system identified a trash-tier asset transformed into strategic-class technology and confirmed the empire's foundation as growing infrastructure expanded. Investor points flooded Ethan's account and unlocked a new function called authority allocation, with private structure strengthening. Trusted subordinates could receive fragments of enhanced insight without discovering the investor system itself, while undervalued influence grew. Marcus gained improved engineering evaluation, while Mira received accelerated design analysis, with undervalued infrastructure expanding. Gabriel's risk detection deepened, and Lena recognized patterns across hidden financial structures almost instantly, while private infrastructure expanded. Their performance changed overnight, transforming discarded professionals into sharpened extensions of Ethan's judgment, while strategic structure strengthened. Outside Vale Meridian, nobody understood why obscure names suddenly became terrifyingly effective as connected capacity multiplied. Inside, the empire grew quietly through exclusive agreements, prepared warehouses, and controlled transport routes, while undervalued infrastructure expanded. Farm cooperatives accepted long-term storage contracts while medical suppliers signed confidential deployment agreements, with careful pressure intensifying. Research laboratories paid for private access, and foreign buyers offered sums Ethan rejected without hesitation, with patient pressure intensifying. Scarcity increased desire, and carefully controlled desire eventually produced surrender on favorable terms, with controlled exposure approaching. A children's hospital received emergency units after a heat failure endangered irreplaceable medicine, as careful pressure intensified. A rural district preserved an entire harvest during transportation disruption, using Northstar's hidden capacity as patient pressure intensified. One research center saved a rare treatment that would otherwise have been destroyed overnight, while hidden evidence accumulated. Each success appeared isolated publicly, allowing rumors to spread without revealing the network, with patient evidence accumulating. Vale Meridian became a name whispered behind boardroom doors with equal parts hope and fear as controlled exposure approached. Some believed it was a sovereign fund, while others suspected a criminal financial consortium, while controlled pressure intensified. Theories claiming the company did not exist pleased Ethan most because invisibility remained valuable, with careful confidence growing. At the Western warehouse, he built a private chamber displaying every Harrington asset, while patient exposure approached. The estate, family trusts, aircraft, coastal residents, operating companies, and stolen inheritance covered one wall. As patient evidence accumulated, beside each appeared the exact path required to seize, freeze, devalue, or redirect ownership, while growing evidence accumulated. Lena entered carrying a black drive, her face colorless beneath the command room lights, while patient leverage tightened. After months of searching, she had recovered recordings connected to the will forgery, with patient exposure approaching. The files documented payments, threats against the nurse, and instructions to the handwriting expert, while growing pressure intensified. Most important, an encrypted scan preserved Ethan's mother's original will before Damen destroyed the physical copy, as hidden leverage tightened. For the first time since the overpass, Ethan's hand stopped moving completely, as growing leverage tightened. His mother's signature appeared steady on screen above the words naming him sole heir, as careful exposure approached. The warehouse disappeared from his awareness, replaced by a childhood kitchen and scattered grocery receipts, with hidden exposure approaching. He remembered her laughing when he confused interest rates and patience with inactivity, as careful leverage tightened. That memory lasted one breath before the fortress returned around him colder than before, while hidden leverage tightened. Ethan secured multiple copies of the evidence inside isolated vaults beyond any single attack, while controlled exposure approached. Lena urged him to expose Damen immediately because the records could restore the inheritance, while growing confidence grew. He answered no, and turned toward the screen showing the thief's private investment fund, as controlled evidence accumulated. Damen had persuaded wealthy families, pension managers, and speculators to join the Northstar short, as careful evidence accumulated. Their combined position now exceeded the liquid supply of shares available for repurchase, with growing evidence accumulating. Northstar's public float had quietly shrunk through employee grants, Marcus's ownership, creditors, and friendly institutions, while controlled leverage tightened. When the price reversed, short sellers would compete for shares that simply did not exist as growing exposure approached. The resulting squeeze would not wound Damen's fund. It would consume everything connected to it, with careful evidence accumulating. Still, Ethan waited because he wanted the illusion surrounding his stepbrother completely perfected, while controlled evidence accumulated. The memorial banquet drew closer, now advertised as a celebration of Northstar's coming liquidation, while careful confidence grew. Damen publicly claimed the Harrington Group would acquire the patents immediately after bankruptcy, as patient confidence grew. No agreement supported the announcement because the lender no longer controlled those assets, while careful pressure intensified. Northstar was not bankrupt, yet repeated promises had turned fantasy into certainty inside Damen's mind, with patient confidence growing. Invitations went to bankers, politicians, reporters, socialites, and every guest who watched Ethan beaten, while careful evidence accumulated. Celeste ordered Ethan's mother's portrait cleaned before preparing another speech about family loyalty, while patient pressure intensified. Victor agreed to praise Damen as the true heir capable of protecting her legacy, with growing leverage tightening. Then a private messenger delivered Ethan another photograph from his stepbrother, as growing confidence grew. The image showed his former bedroom converted into a wine room beneath expensive imported shelving, as hidden exposure approached. Damen had written that even Ethan's memories now belonged to him, as hidden confidence grew. Ethan studied the photograph, then asked Gabriel who held the estate mortgage. With controlled leverage tightening, the lender was much larger than several Vale Meridian subsidiaries and appeared impossible to acquire, while hidden confidence grew. System analysis exposed a concealed liquidity crisis inside its parent company and several desperate obligations, with patient leverage tightening. Vale Meridian arranged rescue financing through multiple entities before purchasing the distressed parent, as hidden pressure intensified. By the following day, Ethan controlled the debt secured against the Harrington estate, while hidden pressure intensified. The marble hall, wine room, portrait, gardens, and every wall Damen considered permanent now answered to him, while patient confidence grew. He placed the mortgage documents beside the banquet invitation without sending any warning, as controlled leverage tightened. Marcus confirmed the government contract had been signed and deployment could begin immediately, with growing confidence growing. Mira reported the compact units had passed every required safety and performance test, as controlled pressure intensified. Gabriel verified their logistics network could support initial distribution without public partners, while growing exposure approached. Lena secured the original will, recordings, and payment trails inside a portable evidence case, with controlled confidence growing. A ruined founder, stolen engineer, disgraced risk officer, and guilty witness stood before Ethan, while growing leverage tightened. Damen would have mocked every person in that room and dismissed every asset they developed, with hidden evidence accumulating. Together, they formed an empire capable of freezing his financial world with one instruction, with controlled evidence accumulating. The system announced that market opening would trigger catastrophic enemy exposure and extreme volatility, as growing evidence accumulated. Ethan refused to proceed yet, because the guests needed to arrive before the performance ended. With growing exposure approaching, champagne needed to flow, Victor needed to praise his son, and Celeste needed to smile, while careful exposure approached. Damen had to stand at the highest point of his stolen throne for the fall to become perfect, with hidden confidence growing. Ethan selected a simple black suit without decoration from the wardrobe beside the command chamber, with hidden leverage tightening. Marcus asked whether he intended to attend the banquet personally instead of directing events remotely, while controlled confidence grew. Ethan adjusted one cuff and opened the handwritten invitation to its final insult, as growing pressure intensified. He had been invited to watch from outside, but this time they would watch him enter, as controlled confidence grew. Night transformed the Harrington estate into a palace glowing above wet gardens and iron gates, with careful exposure approaching. Black cars arrived continuously as politicians, bankers, fund managers, celebrities, and media personalities stepped out, with controlled pressure intensifying. Valets opened doors beneath rain while cameras documented the elite entering another expensive celebration, as careful confidence grew. Inside, crystal chandeliers burned over white roses and tables arranged beneath Ethan's mother's portrait, as patient exposure approached. A string orchestra played in the same hall where musicians had covered the sound of his beating, with hidden pressure intensifying. Damen stood below the portrait wearing a white dinner jacket and receiving guests like royalty as hidden evidence accumulated. Behind him, one screen displayed Harrington's emblem beside Northstar's logo and a message celebrating preserved legacy, while careful leverage tightened. The lie appeared so enormous and polished that nobody present questioned whether the acquisition existed, while hidden exposure approached. Celeste moved through the hall in diamonds and black silk, accepting sympathy for a woman she despised, with growing pressure intensifying. Whenever someone mentioned Ethan, she lowered her voice and described his supposed emotional collapse as patient leverage tightened. Guests nodded, including several people who still possessed recordings of his blood on the floor, with careful leverage tightening. Victor occupied the leather chair near the fireplace, looking older and less certain than before, while patient evidence accumulated. The chief financial officer had called repeatedly that afternoon, but Victor ignored every warning, with hidden confidence growing. Damen promised Northstar would collapse by morning and the short position would solve every financial problem, with patient confidence growing. The expected profit supposedly covered loans, renovations, aircraft payments, and Celeste's unfinished coastal residence, as careful confidence grew. Victor wanted belief more than truth because belief required no admission that he had gambled everything, with patient evidence accumulating. Damen stepped onto the stage, and applause rolled through the hall before he raised both hands, with controlled evidence accumulating. He declared the evening the beginning of a new era built on responsibility rather than sentiment, while controlled leverage tightened. Northstar's stock chart fell across the giant screen, producing laughter from investors betting against it, with growing evidence accumulating. Damen accused weak companies of hiding incompetence behind emotional appeals and calling discipline cruelty, with controlled confidence growing. Tomorrow, he announced, Northstar would enter final liquidation and surrender its useful assets to Harrington, with controlled pressure intensifying. The founder would be removed, and the revolutionary patents would enter supposedly responsible hands, as growing leverage tightened. Several bankers exchanged nervous looks because none had seen a signed acquisition agreement, as controlled exposure approached. Damen's confidence silenced their doubts, exactly as expensive confidence had silenced truth at the funeral, as careful exposure approached. He lifted a champagne glass and offered a toast toward the future, as controlled pressure intensified. Before anyone drank, the estate doors opened and cold wind crossed the marble floor, as patient exposure approached. Ethan entered alone wearing black, without visible jewelry, guards, titles, or theatrical presentation, while patient pressure intensified. Conversation died outward from the doorway in expanding waves until the entire hall faced him, while growing confidence grew. A guest dropped her glass, and the shattering sound echoed beneath the chandeliers, with growing pressure intensifying. He walked down the red carpet without acknowledging the people who once laughed at his pain, with careful leverage tightening. They moved aside instinctively despite seeing no public power capable of explaining their discomfort, as hidden confidence grew. Damen stared from the stage for one unguarded heartbeat before forcing himself to laugh, with controlled leverage tightening. The room joined too quickly, using mockery to disguise the sudden fear beneath recognition, as careful leverage tightened. He welcomed the lost orphan loudly and reminded Ethan that the invitation permitted watching from outside, while careful pressure intensified. Ethan stopped at the same marble section where guards had forced him to his knees, while hidden evidence accumulated. No blood remained, but he remembered the exact temperature and pressure against his bones, while hidden confidence grew. Celeste approached with open arms and manufactured concern, performing motherhood before the assembled cameras, while controlled evidence accumulated. One look from Ethan stopped her midway, leaving both hands suspended uselessly between them, with patient exposure approaching. She whispered that he should not be there, while Damen repeated his insult from the stage, while careful evidence accumulated. Ethan answered that he owned the outside, and the laughter weakened immediately as patient evidence accumulated. Damen tilted his head, pretending the sentence meant nothing while confusion spread across the nearest tables as financial consequences landed. Ethan removed folded documents from his coat and gave them to a server standing nearby, with visible consequences landing. The server hesitated until Victor ordered the papers brought directly to his chair. As visible exposure deepened, his eyes moved across the first page, then the second, before his brandy glass slipped, with visible panic spreading. Celeste seized the documents after seeing terror drain the color from her husband's face. while sudden consequences landed. The mortgage holder had changed, and Vale Meridian now controlled every loan secured against the estate, while visible pressure intensified. She called the transaction impossible, while Ethan calmly corrected her by calling it expensive, as sudden collapse accelerated. Damen descended from the stage and dismissed the purchase as one distressed loan without real significance, as visible panic spread. Ethan glanced at the portrait, marble floor, gardens, and surrounding walls before answering. As financial exposure deepened, the loan did not make him powerful. It made every Harrington inside the estate a tenant, with public pressure intensifying. Silence entered the room more completely than any shouted threat could have achieved, with public exposure deepening. Celeste insisted the building was their home, but Ethan reminded her it was collateral, with sudden exposure deepening. Victor promised they could refinance, and Ethan invited him to try every lender already refusing, as uncontrolled pressure intensified. Damen claimed the estate alone gave Ethan no leverage over the family corporation, while visible panic spread. Ethan agreed and looked toward the screen still displaying Northstar's collapsing price, while sudden collapse accelerated. One phone vibrated, followed by another, until messages spread through the hall like insects, as sudden pressure intensified. Bankers checked alerts, fund managers refreshed feeds, and smiles disappeared from carefully prepared faces, with sudden collapse accelerating. The Harrington chief financial officer rushed through a side entrance, looking pale and breathless, while public collapse accelerated. He warned Damen there was a problem involving Northstar, but the chairman ordered him to handle it, as financial panic spread. The screen behind the stage flickered before replacing the falling chart with an official government seal, while sudden exposure deepened. A live procurement announcement began, showing Marcus and Mira beside compact preservation units, as visible collapse accelerated. The government confirmed Northstar had won a strategic contract after unprecedented trial results, as public panic spread. Emergency deployment would begin across hospitals, research centers, food networks, and national supply facilities as uncontrolled consequences landed. No one inside the estate breathed while Northstar's price jumped and triggered an immediate trading halt, with public consequences landing. Damen stared at the screen with his mouth open, unable to produce the confidence that usually controlled rooms, with financial consequences landing. The chief financial officer grabbed his sleeve and whispered that their short position had become catastrophic, with uncontrolled exposure deepening. Damen demanded they close it immediately, then ordered purchases after hearing the market offered no exit, with visible collapse accelerating. There were almost no shares available because Ethan had spent months quietly removing them, with sudden consequences landing. When trading resumed, every desperate buy order pushed Northstar's price higher instead of providing escape, as sudden exposure deepened. Margin demand struck Harrington funds before the guests fully understood what the announcement meant, as public pressure intensified. Lenders called collateral, private investors demanded withdrawals, and emergency credit lines suddenly disappeared, while financial exposure deepened. The screen split, showing Northstar rising violently while Harrington Group shares collapsed beneath forced selling, with financial collapse accelerating. Damen stole the officer's phone and demanded access to facilities that had already been suspended, with financial exposure deepening. He asked who blocked the final credit line, and the officer looked toward Ethan, while uncontrolled consequences landed. Every guest followed that gaze to the man standing calmly beneath his mother's portrait, while visible exposure deepened. Damen's lips trembled around the accusation, but Ethan answered only with a slight smile, while financial consequences landed. The doors opened again, allowing Gabriel Stone to enter beside representatives from several banks, while public exposure deepened. Lena followed with a black case while attorneys, auditors, and regulatory officers filled the entrance, while public panic spread. The elegant banquet fractured instantly, as guests understood the collapse extended beyond one bad trade. While uncontrolled exposure deepened, fund managers rushed toward exits, politicians removed donor badges, and bankers shouted into phones, as uncontrolled panic spread. One investor screamed that her family trust had been placed inside Damen's private fund, with sudden panic spreading. Chairs overturned, white roses scattered, and champagne soaked the carpet beneath expensive shoes, while public pressure intensified. Damen climbed onto the stage and demanded calm, producing even greater panic from everyone listening, while sudden pressure intensified. Victor stared at the collapsing prices and asked how much money his son had borrowed. While financial pressure intensified, Damen ignored him until Victor seized his sleeve and demanded an answer again, as visible pressure intensified. The response came through the chief financial officer, whose whispered number made Victor stumble as uncontrolled collapse accelerated. Damen insisted the amount had been necessary to guarantee victory, even while every screen proved defeat, with uncontrolled collapse accelerating. Victor said they were not winning, and his son shoved him hard enough to strike a table as sudden panic spread. Celeste screamed that Damen had attacked his father before remembering her own pledged residence, while financial panic spread. She demanded to know why the coastal property appeared inside foreclosure notices already reaching her phone, while visible collapse accelerated. Damen reminded her that she signed every guarantee without reading because she wanted the house, with uncontrolled panic spreading. The gentle widow vanished, and Celeste clawed at his dinner jacket while calling him worthless, while sudden panic spread. He struck her across the face, splitting open the family manners that once concealed their rot, while public consequences landed. For years, Harrington cruelty had hidden beneath ceremony. Now fear exposed its natural shape, while financial collapse accelerated. Damen stood above both parents, breathing hard before pointing toward Ethan and blaming him as public collapse accelerated. Ethan reminded everyone that Northstar followed all disclosure requirements and hid nothing illegally, with uncontrolled consequences landing. Damen shouted that Ethan knew the contract was coming and deliberately allowed him to continue shorting, while uncontrolled pressure intensified. The answer was simple and fatal, because Damen had insisted on increasing the trade himself, with visible exposure deepening. He lunged across the marble, but security personnel hidden throughout the hall moved first, with public panic spreading. Servers, drivers, technicians, and guests revealed themselves as Vale Meridian protection Ethan positioned earlier, while visible consequences landed. Damen was restrained before reaching him, his struggle reduced to useless movement inside a collapsing empire, as visible consequences landed. Another margin demand arrived, followed by forced liquidation of his private fund and related holdings, with uncontrolled pressure intensifying. The leased aircraft was seized at the airport before its crew completed departure preparations, as financial collapse accelerated. Celeste's accounts froze. The unfinished coastal residence entered foreclosure, and family trust transfers halted, with financial pressure intensifying. Victor's pledged voting shares moved under collateral enforcement while Harrington's board convened emergency removal proceedings, with public collapse accelerating. Every screen became a window showing another part of Damen's life disappearing beyond recovery, as public consequences landed. Gabriel informed Ethan that Vale Meridian had acquired controlling voting power through the collapsing collateral, as sudden consequences landed. The board removed Damen as chairman effective immediately, leaving him without company authority, with visible pressure intensifying. His laugh sounded cracked as he insisted no one could remove him because he was Harrington, as public exposure deepened. Ethan answered that he was not, reducing every stolen title to nothing with 2 words, with financial panic spreading. The insult struck deeper than the financial numbers because Damen had built his entire identity around belonging. As financial pressure intensified, Lena placed the black case on a table and opened it before the remaining cameras, while uncontrolled collapse accelerated. Inside rested payment records, witness instructions, security recordings, and a verified copy of the original will. As uncontrolled exposure deepened, the last color vanished from Damen's face when Ethan lifted his mother's authentic document, while uncontrolled panic spread. He claimed the court had recognized the replacement will and demanded proof of forgery, with sudden pressure intensifying. Lena played the first recording, filling the hall with Damen's voice threatening the private nurse, while public panic spread. A second recorded him instructing the handwriting expert to reproduce Ethan's mother's signature, with financial pressure intensifying. Payment schedules, hidden accounts, and promises of protection appeared across the main screen as public panic spread. Guests turned from Damen not because morality awakened, but because association had become dangerous as financial panic spread. Politicians denied friendship, bankers withdrew support, and socialites suddenly remembered conflicting travel schedules, with public exposure deepening. One reporter began broadcasting live while Damen's own voice echoed beneath the stolen portrait, while financial collapse accelerated. His anger finally changed into fear when public distance replaced the applause he depended upon, with financial collapse accelerating. Damen asked whether Ethan had planned every part of the evening from the beginning, with public panic spreading. Ethan explained that he only followed the opportunities his stepbrother repeatedly chose, while visible consequences landed. The system announced the destruction of the enemy control network in confirmation of strategic authority, while visible collapse accelerated. Thunder broke outside, and the chandeliers flickered before darkness swallowed most of the hall, as sudden collapse accelerated. Emergency power illuminated only the portrait wall where Ethan stood above the restrained thief, with visible exposure deepening. Victor and Celeste remained on the floor while the crowd pressed against the walls, as uncontrolled panic spread. They had watched Ethan kneel once when he lacked power, and now they understood the difference, with sudden pressure intensifying. A live Northstar deployment appeared on the surviving screen during a regional hospital outage, with uncontrolled consequences landing. Compact units restored a failing medical grid and protected medicine before emergency generators stabilized, with public consequences landing. One technology command prevented a crisis from becoming tragedy while Harrington collapsed beside it, as uncontrolled consequences landed. Damen slowly realized Ethan owned the market, debt, estate, evidence, infrastructure, and future demand, with uncontrolled exposure deepening. The orphan thrown into reign had not returned as a rival seeking equal treatment, as financial consequences landed. He had returned as the owner of every mechanism capable of deciding whether Damen survived financially, while uncontrolled consequences landed. Dawn found the estate surrounded by regulators, bank vehicles, auditors, and reporters beyond the gates, as financial pressure intensified. The soaked red carpet resembled a dark river leading into a palace already transformed into a tomb, while visible pressure intensified. Inside, chandeliers revealed shattered glasses, overturned tables, mud, champagne, and crushed white roses, while public consequences landed. Damen remained on the marble floor with restrained wrists and a torn white dinner jacket, while sudden panic spread. The man who entered as a prince now resembled a gambler found beneath the table after closing, as uncontrolled pressure intensified. Victor sat in the same fireplace chair from which he had watched Ethan beaten months earlier, with financial panic spreading. Celeste knelt beside him without her diamonds, removed as disputed assets under seizure orders, with uncontrolled panic spreading. Ethan stood beneath his mother's portrait while every person in the hall waited for his decisions, as visible pressure intensified. Gabriel delivered the emergency board report confirming Ethan's full control of the Harrington group, while visible exposure deepened. Remaining directors approved restructuring, while family trusts stayed frozen pending fraud proceedings, with sudden panic spreading. Damen's private fund entered liquidation, and creditors prepared to claim the estate before noon, with public collapse accelerating. Celeste crawled across the marble toward Ethan, repeating that fear had controlled her actions, with visible pressure intensifying. He watched her travel over the exact place where his blood once landed, while sudden collapse accelerated. She claimed Damen threatened everyone and insisted the family had been trapped by his power, with financial exposure deepening. Damen called her a lying parasite and reminded her of every luxury she requested, with visible collapse accelerating. Celeste accused him of forging the will, and he reminded her she found the handwriting expert, while sudden exposure deepened. Their accusations collided until shared appetite replaced every remaining illusion of family loyalty, while public exposure deepened. Victor finally ordered silence, but neither listened because desperation had made honesty profitable, as public collapse accelerated. Ethan did not need to expose them further. Ruined conspirators always dismantled one another, as visible collapse accelerated. Victor rose unsteadily, crossed the hall, and admitted he had failed to protect Ethan, while financial consequences landed. The reply came with two quiet words, "You watched," as sudden exposure deepened. Victor lowered his head and called himself weak, but Ethan corrected him again, as visible exposure deepened. Weakness had not controlled Victor, comfort had, because intervention threatened everything he enjoyed, as public exposure deepened. The old man insisted he loved Ethan's mother despite his cowardice and silence, while uncontrolled pressure intensified. Disgust entered Ethan's face when Victor used love to excuse betrayal after her death, while visible panic spread. He reminded Victor of each moment when ignorance stopped being possible, as visible consequences landed. Victor knew before the beating, before the police entered, and before Ethan's belongings disappeared, while uncontrolled collapse accelerated. Every time truth demanded sacrifice, he selected brandy, silence, and belief in Damen, with uncontrolled collapse accelerating. Victor admitted fear of losing everything, then looked around the ruined hall, with visible panic spreading. Ethan told him he still possessed memory, and memory was exactly what he would keep, with sudden exposure deepening. Victor collapsed to his knees without physical force because his body no longer supported denial, with sudden consequences landing. Celeste reached for Ethan's coat, and a guard moved before he stopped him with one gesture, with unavoidable blame spreading. Her fingers released the fabric when she recognized that even physical contact required his permission, as shared denial collapsed. She whispered they were still family and claimed his mother would never want this destruction, with final denial collapsing. The words produced the same thin smile Ethan had worn beneath the overpass after everything disappeared, while final denial collapsed. His mother had trusted Celeste, held her hand, and believed a promise given beside a hospital bed, with growing denial collapsing. Ethan revealed that the first question Celeste asked during those final hours concerned the original will, while buried memory returned. She called herself confused, but Lena prepared another recording from inside the black evidence case, as unavoidable memory returned. Celeste's voice entered the hall sounding soft, patient, and comforting beside a dying woman, as growing fear deepened. Ethan's mother weakly insisted her son receive everything and asked Celeste to guarantee his protection, with buried guilt surfacing. The recorded promise arrived immediately, clear enough that nobody could pretend misunderstanding, with final blame spreading. When the audio ended, Celeste remained staring at the floor while Ethan crouched before her, with growing blame spreading. Their faces reached the same height, reversing the position she enjoyed during the funeral, as shared fear deepened. He asked what she said when servants removed his belongings before the body became cold, as unavoidable fear deepened. Celeste tried apologizing generally, but Ethan demanded the precise sentence and waited, as growing blame spread. Silence became unbearable until she admitted calling him a parasite grateful for whatever remained, while unavoidable memory returned. Then Ethan asked what she had allowed him to keep after promising his mother protection, with shared denial collapsing. Her answer dissolved into uncontrolled crying, because she had allowed him absolutely nothing, with growing fear deepening. Ethan stood and confirmed the answer without offering forgiveness, comfort, or visible satisfaction, while buried guilt surfaced. Across the hall, Damen watched and discovered the revenge was not only financial, as buried guilt surfaced. Every insult, laugh, recording, and kick had been preserved more carefully than the stolen assets, as final memory returned. He attempted the language he trusted most and proposed a rational business arrangement, with shared fear deepening. Damen claimed investors should never waste useful assets, even when those assets belong to defeated enemies, with shared guilt surfacing. He offered knowledge of Harrington clients, political relationships, counterparties, and private influence networks, with unavoidable memory returning. In exchange, Ethan would keep him outside prison and allow him to work inside Vale Meridian, while shared guilt surfaced. Gabriel looked openly disgusted, while Lena avoided meeting the former employer's desperate stare, as shared guilt surfaced. Ethan asked whether Damen wanted employment after publicly calling him an unemployed parasite, with buried fear deepening. Damen dismissed the past insult as personal emotion, but Ethan treated it as an accurate description, as growing guilt surfaced. Regulators confirmed Damen had been removed from every position and his licenses suspended, with final fear deepening. Gabriel added that the estate revoked his residence rights and financial accounts remained frozen, while final guilt surfaced. Ethan looked down at the stepbrother who had once ordered security to throw him outside, as unavoidable blame spread. Under those conditions, Damen was now the unemployed man standing without property, access, or authority, as growing denial collapsed. No guest laughed because everyone feared enjoying humiliation before the wrong person, as final guilt surfaced. Damen accused Ethan of becoming equally manipulative through distressed acquisitions and calculated destruction, while unavoidable fear deepened. Ethan accepted every description without pretending revenge had made him morally pure, while unavoidable blame spread. He did not return to prove kindness. He returned to win using choices his enemies provided, with final memory returning. Damen seized that admission and insisted the two stepbrothers were fundamentally identical, with final guilt surfacing. Ethan explained the difference in one distinction the thief could not overcome, while shared memory returned. Damen stole assets from dying people, while Ethan invested in value Damen was too stupid to recognize, while buried denial collapsed. The short position, leverage, forged will, banquet, and public lies had all been voluntary decisions, with unavoidable denial collapsing. Damen accused Ethan of concealing information, but markets never owed safety to arrogant attackers, as buried denial collapsed. His breathing grew faster as financial arguments failed to create an exit, as shared memory returned. He tried blood next, reminding Ethan that they had grown up beneath one family roof, with growing guilt surfacing. Ethan corrected the relationship to stepbrothers and recalled every day Damen insisted he did not belong, while growing memory returned. Damen called those words childish cruelty from years before, hoping time had erased responsibility, as buried blame spread. Ethan reminded him he repeated the same message during the funeral while enjoying the violence, while shared blame spread. The most damaging truth followed when Ethan said Damen had looked genuinely happy, while buried blame spread. His stepbrother's shoulders folded because the memory was undeniable even without a recording, as buried memory returned. Damen turned toward Victor and begged the father who had protected him for decades, while final memory returned. Victor covered his face, unable to offer rescue after learning his guarantees destroyed the family, with shared memory returning. Next, Damen called toward Celeste, but she crawled farther away and accused him of striking her, as shared blame spread. He reminded both parents they participated willingly and benefited from every stolen asset, while growing guilt surfaced. Celeste denied responsibility, claiming the entire scheme belonged to her son alone, while shared denial collapsed. Damen stared at the mother who once encouraged every move and understood she would sacrifice him, as unavoidable denial collapsed. The family bond ended exactly as Ethan expected, not through his pressure but through disappearing reward, with buried denial collapsing. Damen laughed without amusement and declared he had acted to preserve their collective future, as final fear deepened. Victor finally answered that his son acted only for applause and recognition, with growing memory returning. The accusation struck the deepest wound inside Damen, who had always measured love through public victory, with unavoidable fear deepening. He shouted that Victor gave Ethan's mother everything while neglecting his biological son, while final fear deepened. Victor replied that she saved the company after Damen repeatedly endangered it, with shared blame spreading. Damen screamed that he was still Victor's son, but the room offered no answer, while growing denial collapsed. Ethan crossed toward the fireplace and lifted a glass of wine placed on the mantel, while growing fear deepened. The same social class had once sipped champagne while watching him bleed nearby, as unavoidable guilt surfaced. Now only officers, creditors, auditors, and a family consuming itself remained, while unavoidable denial collapsed. Damen watched Ethan taste the wine and accused him of enjoying the destruction, while buried fear deepened. Ethan answered yes, refusing the false nobility of pretending revenge brought no satisfaction, while shared fear deepened. His stepbrother called him sick and argued the original will could have restored everything months earlier, while unavoidable guilt surfaced. Ethan agreed he could have exposed the fraud, reclaimed the inheritance, and ended the dispute quickly, as final blame spread. When Damen demanded why he waited, Ethan explained that stolen money could simply be returned, while growing blame spread. Confidence required cultivation before it could be harvested at maximum value, with unavoidable guilt surfacing. He needed Damen proud, leveraged, trusted, and completely unable to imagine defeat, with buried blame spreading. Victor's guarantees, Celeste's signatures, and every borrowed celebration created the final structure, with buried memory returning. Damen had executed Ethan's plan perfectly without receiving a single instruction, as buried fear deepened. Regulatory officers approached to transfer him from estate security into formal custody, while final blame spread. For the first time, sincere terror loosened an apology from Damen's mouth, as final denial collapsed. He apologized for the forged will, the accusation, the beating, and the night beneath the overpass, as growing memory returned. His chair scraped across the marble as officers began dragging him toward the entrance, while shared denial collapsed. Damen twisted desperately, forcing himself to mention Ethan's mother while begging for mercy, as unavoidable fear deepened. The temperature inside Ethan's expression dropped immediately, and the apology collapsed into panic, with unavoidable denial collapsing. Still, nothing new had been uncovered about her death, so officers continued toward the doors, with growing fear deepening. Before leaving, Damen insisted he had never wanted her legacy destroyed, only controlled, as buried guilt surfaced. Ethan answered that control without understanding always becomes destruction, especially when fueled by entitlement, as unavoidable blame spread. The doors closed behind the prisoner, briefly ending the sound of his desperate bargaining, while final fear deepened. Victor and Celeste remained beneath the portrait while creditors continued cataloging the estate, with growing memory returning. One by one, bank representatives marked paintings, jewelry, vehicles, wine, and furniture as collateral, with shared memory returning. The ritual resembled the servants removing Ethan's belongings, except no family name could stop it, as final guilt surfaced. Celeste asked whether she could keep personal clothing and a small amount of money as buried denial collapsed. Ethan instructed the officers to follow the minimum legal protections and nothing more, as final fear deepened. Victor received the same answer regarding medical treatment, residence, and daily living support, with final guilt surfacing. The decision was not theatrical cruelty. It recreated the exact security they once considered enough for others, with buried memory returning. Celeste protested that a woman of her position could not survive without staff and protection, while unavoidable fear deepened. Ethan reminded her that position had already disappeared when the accounts were frozen, while final guilt surfaced. Victor requested private conversation about the company his late wife had rescued, with unavoidable memory returning. Ethan refused because the company was no longer a family matter, only an asset under restructuring, while growing blame spread. Gabriel began dividing healthy operations from fraudulent divisions and debt-loaded vanity projects as growing denial collapsed. Thousands of ordinary employees would retain work, while executives tied to Damen faced investigation, with buried blame spreading. Ethan did not destroy functioning businesses merely to satisfy anger, because waste offended his investor discipline as growing fear deepened. He preserved useful systems, removed corruption, and redirected ownership toward Vale Meridian, while shared guilt surfaced. This distinction terrified the old directors more than emotional revenge would have, as final blame spread. They realized Ethan could separate value from loyalty with complete coldness and precision as buried memory returned. The Harrington name vanished from several subsidiaries before noon as restructuring notices spread, as unavoidable denial collapsed. Vale Meridian's emblem appeared nowhere publicly, leaving markets uncertain about the new controlling force, with buried guilt surfacing. News networks replayed Damen's banquet collapse, forged will recordings, and Northstar's explosive reversal, while shared blame spread. Commentators who praised the short position now called it reckless, obvious, and criminal, with shared blame spreading. The same analysts who mocked Marcus described his patent as revolutionary after government confirmation, while buried denial collapsed. Ethan watched none of the coverage, because public hindsight offered no useful information, with final denial collapsing. He returned to the Western warehouse with Gabriel, Lena, Marcus, and Mira before evening. While growing memory returned, Northstar units moved toward hospitals while transport companies activated routes prepared months earlier, while unavoidable blame spread. Synergy Vision filled the command chamber with bright connections as every hidden acquisition began cooperating, while buried memory returned. The system rewarded the successful market reversal, infrastructure control, and recovery of strategic assets, with shared denial collapsing. Ethan's investor points rose far beyond the starter stage and unlocked deeper capital authority, while final memory returned. He could now evaluate entire national sectors, not merely individual businesses and human weaknesses, with growing guilt surfacing. Despite the victory, the primary revenge objective remained marked incomplete inside the interface, while growing fear deepened. The unfinished status surprised him because Damen had lost wealth, position, estate, and public identity, while unavoidable memory returned. Lena examined the evidence archive again, wondering whether the missing requirement involved criminal conviction, with shared fear deepening. Gabriel suggested the market still contained related accounts or hidden ownership beneath another jurisdiction, as shared blame spread. Ethan believed the system had detected something more personal because the objective centered on injustice, while unavoidable denial collapsed. He reopened every record from the hospital, funeral, forgery, and estate transfer, with unavoidable fear deepening. One encrypted directory remained inaccessible inside the recovered private security archive, as shared fear deepened. Lena admitted the folder had been separated from the financial documents and protected with stronger encryption, with growing denial collapsing. Damen's reaction whenever she mentioned that folder had been different from ordinary financial fear, while growing guilt surfaced. Ethan asked why she had not emphasized it earlier, and shame returned across her face, with final blame spreading. She believed it contained private family material unrelated to the inheritance scheme, while unavoidable guilt surfaced. The system scanned the encrypted structure but required additional investor points for absolute decryption, while growing denial collapsed. Ethan possessed enough after the Northstar victory and authorized immediate analysis as shared guilt surfaced. Layers of false directories unfolded, revealing hospital invoices, nurse payments, and medication logs as growing guilt surfaced. A transfer had reached the private nurse several hours before Ethan's mother died, while final blame spread. Another payment followed after the forged will entered the family trust as growing blame spread. Ethan stared at the numbers until the room became completely silent around him, with buried denial collapsing. Financial patterns did not prove murder, but these transactions had no legitimate explanation, while buried guilt surfaced. The hidden folder also contained an audio file recorded automatically by Damen's security application as buried fear deepened. Before opening it, Ethan ordered Lena to contact investigators and preserve every metadata record, with buried fear deepening. The primary revenge objective remained incomplete, pulsing like a warning beside his mother's name as unavoidable memory returned. Whatever waited inside the file would decide whether the banquet collapse was truly the final battle, as final denial collapsed. Investigators arrived at the Western warehouse under strict confidentiality before dawn reached the city again, while verified suspicion deepened. They copied the encrypted archive through forensic equipment while Ethan watched every procedural detail, while confidential testimony strengthened. He refused shortcuts because evidence obtained improperly could give Damen another weapon inside court, as verified truth surfaced. The system displayed probability models for authentication, admissibility, witness cooperation, and possible suppression attempts, while growing evidence aligned. Gabriel coordinated attorneys, while Lena documented how she recovered the private security credentials, with verified pressure converging. Marcus and Mira returned to Northstar operations, leaving revenge matters outside their technical responsibilities, with forensic suspicion deepening. Ethan valued that separation because empires collapse when every employee becomes involved in personal wars, as verified evidence aligned. Northstar's contract activation continued across the country while the investigation moved quietly beneath public attention, with legal truth surfacing. Hospitals installed compact units, regional farms secured emergency storage, and laboratories transferred vulnerable materials as growing suspicion deepened. Every successful deployment raised Vale Meridian's credibility before most clients learned who controlled it, with confidential suspicion deepening. Market commentators searched for Ethan's history and found almost nothing beyond the public family scandal as confidential pressure converged. Some declared him a mysterious genius, while others assumed an established institution operated behind him as legal suspicion deepened. Neither interpretation captured the bruised man who built his first positions inside a public library, while confidential suspicion deepened. Ethan preferred misunderstanding because legends distracted rivals from studying structures and counterparty exposure, while forensic pressure converged. The investor system presented another reward, behavioral dominion, unlocked through catastrophic enemy commitment, with legal suspicion deepening. This function did not control minds. It modeled how pressure, pride, fear, and greed changed decisions, while verified evidence aligned. Damen's predicted behavior appeared across multiple legal scenarios, each branch beginning with denial, with forensic evidence aligning. He would blame Celeste, Victor, Lena, the nurse, and eventually Ethan before admitting anything, as legal testimony strengthened. If confronted with proof he considered incomplete, Damen would become aggressive and reveal more, with growing truth surfacing. If shown overwhelming evidence immediately, he would stop talking and rely entirely on counsel, as growing pressure converged. Ethan instructed investigators to reveal only the payments first while concealing the audio recording, with verified truth surfacing. The strategy made one detective uncomfortable until the system's reasoning became ordinary legal interrogation planning, as forensic pressure converged. No fabricated evidence or coercion was required. Damen's arrogance only needed enough room to speak, as growing testimony strengthened. At the estate, Victor and Celeste underwent separate questioning about the hospital's final night, as confidential truth surfaced. Victor admitted he left after arguing with Ethan's mother about restructuring the family trust, while verified pressure converged. She planned to remove Harrington guarantees and protect Ethan's inheritance from company creditors, with forensic pressure converging. That decision threatened Victor's access to her capital, but he claimed he accepted it reluctantly, while forensic testimony strengthened. The system marked shame, evasion, and self-protection, yet found no indication Victor ordered physical harm, as confidential evidence aligned. Celeste's interview produced a more complicated pattern filled with partial truths and concealed knowledge, while verified truths surfaced. She admitted learning the trust would change, then contacting Damen before the final documents were signed, as legal pressure converged. Celeste insisted she wanted him to persuade the dying woman, not interfere with treatment, while growing truth surfaced. When investigators mentioned the nurse payment, her hands began shaking despite practiced confusion, while forensic suspicion deepened. She claimed Damen handled medical arrangements and never explained financial transfers, with confidential truth surfacing. Behavioral probability suggested Celeste knew something improper occurred but avoided learning precise methods, while growing pressure converged. Her cowardice resembled Victor's, except she had moved closer to the machinery of the crime, with legal testimony strengthening. Neither parent had stopped Damen because each feared losing access to Ethan's mother's fortune, with confidential testimony strengthening. The difference between ignorance and deliberate blindness mattered legally, but not emotionally to Ethan, while verified testimony strengthened. He instructed attorneys to preserve every available charge while refusing exaggerated accusations unsupported by evidence, as forensic truth surfaced. Damen had invented crimes against him. Ethan would not repeat that method even for revenge, with verified evidence aligning. The system rewarded source integrity and risk control, increasing the reliability of legal outcome estimates, with forensic truth surfacing. By midday, the audio metadata was authenticated as original and linked to Damen's personal device, with growing testimony strengthening. Investigators identified background, hospital equipment, timestamp signals, and the nurse's voice inside the recording, with growing evidence aligning. The nurse disappeared after the funeral, but financial tracing revealed a quiet coastal town, with verified suspicion deepening. Vale Meridian owned a transport company operating nearby, allowing surveillance without alerting local Harrington contacts, as growing truth surfaced. Ethan refused to abduct, threaten, or purchase her testimony despite knowing those methods would be faster, with confidential pressure converging. Instead, Gabriel coordinated a lawful protection offer through federal investigators already handling the fraud. With growing pressure converging, the nurse contacted authorities after learning Damen's accounts were frozen and his influence destroyed, with legal pressure converging. Fear had kept her silent. The disappearance of his money finally weakened that fear, as confidential testimony strengthened. She described medication instructions that reduced life support while making the decline appear natural, as verified pressure converged. Ethan listened through a secure call without interrupting, even when her voice broke, while forensic truth surfaced. His mother's condition had been serious, but doctors expected several more days of lucidity, while legal suspicion deepened. Those days were enough to sign revised trust papers and expose the replacement will, while legal truth surfaced. Damen could not risk that, especially after announcing control of her fortune to lenders, as verified testimony strengthened. The nurse claimed he threatened her family and promised payment, repeating the pattern used against Lena, while growing suspicion deepened. Unlike Lena, she had directly altered medication and carried responsibility no threat could erase, as legal evidence aligned. Ethan offered witness protection through investigators, not forgiveness or private payment, as growing evidence aligned. The nurse agreed to testify after receiving written guarantees for her children, as legal truth surfaced. Her cooperation strengthened the murder case but did not yet explain Celeste's participation, as confidential suspicion deepened. A hospital security log showed Celeste entering the room before the medication adjustment, as forensic evidence aligned. She left 10 minutes later and called Damen immediately from a private corridor, as forensic testimony strengthened. Celeste claimed the conversation concerned trust papers, which was technically possible but deeply suspicious, while legal pressure converged. The system could estimate deception, but Ethan refused to treat probability as courtroom proof, while confidential truth surfaced. He separated what he knew emotionally from what could be demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt, as verified suspicion deepened. That discipline had built his fortune and now protected the case from becoming revenge theater, while growing testimony strengthened. News outside remained focused on Northstar, Harrington's collapse, and the forged inheritance, while legal evidence aligned. Damen's attorneys attempted to frame the financial reversal as a legal market manipulation, with confidential evidence aligning. Regulators found the accusation weak because Ethan disclosed positions properly and never fabricated company information, with verified testimony strengthening. The inspection leak had been real, the restructuring lawful, and the government contract independently awarded, with legal evidence aligning. Damen had increased his exposure after every warning because attacking weakness made him feel powerful, with growing suspicion deepening. His lawyers then argued the original will should remain disputed until probate proceedings concluded, while confidential evidence aligned. Ethan welcomed the delay because controlling Harrington no longer depended on inheritance ownership, as forensic suspicion deepened. Vale Meridian held the estate mortgage, voting shares, creditor positions, and strategic subsidiaries already, while forensic evidence aligned. The will mattered emotionally and criminally, but his empire no longer needed permission from the dead, while legal testimony strengthened. That realization fulfilled part of his mother's lesson about separating asset value from public performance, with forensic testimony strengthening. She left him money, yet her greater inheritance had been the ability to recognize hidden structure, while confidential pressure converged. Damen stole the visible fortune and unknowingly delivered the motivation required to multiply the invisible one, while growing evidence aligned. Still, Ethan spent one night alone inside the restored childhood bedroom before renovations began, with forensic testimony strengthening. The wine shelves remained across walls where his books once stood, preserving Damen's final insult, with forensic evidence aligning. He removed no bottles and touched none of the expensive woodwork, while growing pressure converged. Instead, he sat on the floor where his childhood desk had been and opened the original will. As verified testimony strengthened, his mother's handwriting contained practical instructions, charitable commitments, and protection for long-serving employees, with growing suspicion deepening. The document never insulted Damen, Celeste, or Victor, despite anticipating possible conflict, as confidential testimony strengthened. She had attempted to preserve Ethan without deliberately destroying the family that depended on her, while forensic truth surfaced. That generosity made their betrayal heavier because nobody had needed to lose everything originally. With growing pressure converging, Damen created the zero-sum war through greed, then blamed Ethan for surviving it, as legal pressure converged. The system asked whether emotional state required decision safeguards before the murder confrontation, with verified truth surfacing. Ethan activated full safeguards, restricting major asset transfers until after the legal meeting, as forensic evidence aligned. He trusted himself, but his mother taught him never to confuse confidence with immunity from error, as growing evidence aligned. At sunrise, attorneys informed him the prosecution planned a formal evidence presentation at the estate, while confidential truth surfaced. The location remained secured and offered space to question Victor, Celeste, Lena, and Damen separately, with growing testimony strengthening. Damen would attend under guard because newly authenticated evidence required additional interview, as legal testimony strengthened. His lawyers objected, then changed position after learning the nurse had begun cooperating, with confidential evidence aligning. They hoped the meeting might reveal enough information to negotiate reduced charges, while confidential testimony strengthened. Ethan agreed to attend only as victim, shareholder, and owner of the property, as confidential evidence aligned. He would not direct the questioning once investigators began, preserving the case's independence as forensic truth surfaced. Before leaving, he examined every Northstar deployment and delegated authority across Vale Meridian, with forensic pressure converging. Marcus controlled engineering expansion, Mira supervised compact production, and Gabriel managed liquidity, while legal truth surfaced. Lena remained with the evidence team because her knowledge connected multiple payment pathways, with growing evidence aligning. The organization continued moving even while Ethan stepped away, proving it had become more than one man's revenge, as forensic suspicion deepened. At the estate, Harrington emblems had already been removed from the gates and entrance hall, while forensic evidence aligned. Blank stone remained where the family crest once announced ownership to every visitor, while legal testimony strengthened. Victor entered from supervised care wearing plain clothing without his usual tailored authority, with legal truth surfacing. Celeste arrived separately, accompanied by counsel and carrying no diamonds or attendants, while verified pressure converged. Damen came last between officers, his face thinner after several nights without luxury or control, as forensic pressure converged. He looked around the hall and discovered every familiar servant had been reassigned or dismissed, as confidential truth surfaced. The marbles still belonged to the building, but nothing inside answered to his name, while confidential evidence aligned. Ethan stood near his mother's portrait beside federal investigators in the evidence table, while forensic pressure converged. Damen attempted a smile, suggesting they could resolve unnecessary accusations through negotiation as legal suspicion deepened. Nobody replied, and the empty sound of his voice exposed how completely influence had vanished as verified suspicion deepened. Investigators began with the hospital payments, asking why money reached the nurse before and after death, with legal evidence aligning. Damen claimed routine private care expenses and accused accountants of mislabeling transfers, with legal testimony strengthening. They showed him trust documents proving the timing matched his mother's planned restructuring as confidential pressure converged. He blamed Victor for financial urgency, then Celeste for contacting him in panic, with growing truth surfacing. Victor stared at his son without surprise, while Celeste immediately denied ordering anything, with confidential suspicion deepening. Damen grew irritated and revealed details investigators had not yet introduced, while confidential suspicion deepened. He described the medication as ordinary comfort treatment before anyone named medication, while verified testimony strengthened. One detective asked how he knew treatment type when financial records contained no clinical information, as confidential suspicion deepened. Damen corrected himself too quickly, claiming Celeste mentioned it during the funeral arrangements, with verified testimony strengthening. Celeste shouted that she never discussed medication and accused him of lying again, as growing truth surfaced. The argument opened another path, and investigators allowed them to attack each other's stories, as verified evidence aligned. Victor admitted Damen visited the hospital after everyone believed he had left, with legal pressure converging. Security records supported the visit, while Damen insisted he only retrieved documents from an office, while growing testimony strengthened. Lena produced access logs showing his device connected to the nurse's private security account, with confidential testimony strengthening. Damen demanded to know how Vale Meridian obtained the records and called the investigation corrupted, while verified suspicion deepened. Ethan remained silent because responding would only give the prisoner a target for performance, while verified evidence aligned. The detective displayed the nurse's signed statement without revealing the authenticated recording, while legal pressure converged. Damen read the first page and laughed too loudly, calling her frightened and unreliable, while growing truth surfaced. He suggested she altered medication independently, then blackmailed the family after death, as growing suspicion deepened. That theory contradicted his previous claim that no improper medication existed, while confidential pressure converged. The investigators noted the contradiction, and his lawyer quietly asked for a private consultation, as forensic testimony strengthened. Damen refused because stopping would feel like surrender before Ethan's watching eyes, with forensic truth surfacing. He pointed toward Celeste and claimed she had demanded immediate protection of the trust, while forensic suspicion deepened. Celeste accused him of twisting a request to speak with the dying woman into murder, as legal truth surfaced. Victor asked whether anyone in the room understood what Damen had just implied, with verified pressure converging. The stepbrother froze after realizing his own sentence connected financial motive with medical interference, while legal suspicion deepened. His attorney finally ordered him to stop speaking, but pride had already opened the final door, with verified evidence aligning. The investigator placed one audio device at the center of the table without explaining its contents, while legal evidence aligned. The God-tier investor system marked the primary revenge objective pulsing directly beside that device, while forensic testimony strengthened. When the recording played, the final confrontation would no longer concern stolen inheritance alone, with legal suspicion deepening. The recording began with hospital machinery humming beneath Damen's low, impatient voice. As public judgment hardened, he instructed the nurse to reduce support gradually so the decline would appear natural as lasting grief deepened. A second voice, belonging to the nurse, warned that Ethan's mother remained conscious and responsive, while undeniable proof landed. Damen answered that consciousness was precisely the problem because she intended to change the trust, with public authority remaining. He ordered the dosage adjusted before attorneys returned and promised protection after the estate transferred, while lasting grief deepened. Celeste screamed before the file reached its end, while Victor surged from his chair toward Damen, with lasting consequences spreading. Officers intercepted Victor after one strike, preventing rage from damaging the strongest evidence against his son, as undeniable grief deepened. Damen insisted the woman had already been dying and called the intervention an acceleration, not murder, with final proof landing. That defense horrified even his own attorney, who stopped attempting to control the unraveling confession, while public grief deepened. Victor cursed the biological son he had protected while Celeste backed into the fireplace, with public judgment hardening. She claimed Damen told her the death had been peaceful and inevitable, while criminal judgment hardened. He shouted that Celeste knew the trust change would remove them from Ethan's mother's fortune, while lasting consequences spread. Celeste admitted fear, but denied knowing the medication would be altered, while lasting authority remained. Damen accused her of deliberately avoiding details so she could enjoy the result without responsibility, with criminal grief deepening. The system marked both statements with different shades of deception, shame, and partial truth, with undeniable proof landing. Ethan did not need its analysis to understand the family's final structure, as undeniable judgment hardened. Victor protected comfort, Celeste protected luxury, and Damen protected entitlement through violence, while final grief deepened. Each allowed the next person to move closer to the crime while preserving personal excuses as final judgment hardened. The nurse's testimony, payment records, security logs, and recording now formed one complete chain, with public grief deepening. Damen looked toward Ethan and finally abandoned every attempt at respectable language as undeniable consequences spread. He screamed that Ethan's mother chose an outsider over the family who carried the Harrington name, while undeniable judgment hardened. Ethan reminded him she had saved that name repeatedly after his failures endangered it, while public judgment hardened. Damen answered with the grievance buried beneath every act of cruelty. She chose Ethan, as final grief deepened. There was no business principle, family preservation, or responsible leadership behind the murder, as undeniable proof landed. Only a spoiled son's fury that another person received love, trust, and financial confidence, as criminal judgment hardened. Ethan stood completely still while grief moved beyond anger into something colder and permanent, while criminal authority remained. The system presented retaliation sequences, asset penalties, and methods to intensify Damen's suffering, as lasting judgment hardened. He dismissed every option because the criminal process already possessed the body, as public consequences spread. Ethan owned everything else, including the truth Damen tried to bury with his mother, while criminal grief deepened. The detective formally arrested Damen for murder in addition to fraud and conspiracy charges, while undeniable authority remained. His restraints tightened while he shouted that the evidence had been manipulated by Vale Meridian, with final grief deepening. The authenticated recording continued playing beneath his denials until every word became meaningless, as criminal proof landed. Celeste attempted to approach Ethan again, but he stepped away before she reached him, with lasting proof landing. She asked whether he believed she ordered the death, hoping uncertainty could preserve a fragment of mercy, as public proof landed. Ethan answered that she promised protection, saw danger, chose silence, and accepted the stolen estate, as lasting consequences spread. Whether she named the dosage no longer changed what she became inside his memory, with public proof landing. Victor offered no defense for himself after understanding comfort had financed his wife's death, while final judgment hardened. He requested permission to remain beneath the portrait for several minutes before being removed, while undeniable consequences spread. Ethan allowed it because remembering was the only inheritance Victor still deserved, while public proof landed. Damen's officers guided him toward the doors while the primary revenge objective flashed brighter as final consequences spread. He twisted around and begged Ethan to stop the murder charge from reaching court, while criminal consequences spread. For the first time, he admitted the financial collapse mattered less than the concrete cell ahead, as lasting proof landed. Ethan explained that money once purchased witnesses, experts, police, and public sympathy for Damen, with final authority remaining. Now every account was frozen, and truth had become the only side still capable of paying attention, as criminal consequences spread. The doors closed behind him, and the system announced complete destruction of the hostile inheritance network, with criminal authority remaining. Primary revenge objective completed. With every strategic asset secured and every concealed crime exposed, with criminal consequences spreading, investor points surged into Ethan's account, unlocking national-scale capital analysis and permanent authority functions, with lasting grief deepening. No celebration followed inside him because revenge could finish without restoring the person who was lost, with undeniable grief deepening. He turned toward the portrait and remembered his mother's patient hands over grocery receipts, as criminal authority remained. She had taught him to recognize false growth, but never expected the lesson to become armor, while final consequences spread. Lena stood nearby crying silently. Understanding her false accusation helped the murderers isolate Ethan, with undeniable authority remaining. She promised testimony against every participant without requesting forgiveness again, while undeniable grief deepened. Ethan accepted the work and reminded her that accountability lasted longer than one courtroom appearance, while final proof landed. Gabriel began coordinating protected employee funds while regulators dismantled Damen's investment vehicles, with final judgment hardening. The honest workers inside Harrington companies would not lose pensions for crimes committed by executives, as public grief deepened. Ethan used the same pension claims once exploited for leverage to guarantee their eventual repayment, with final consequences spreading. That decision proved the system served judgment rather than forcing cruelty, greed, or indiscriminate destruction, while final authority remained. Marcus called from a hospital deployment, reporting another emergency shipment preserved through Northstar units, with criminal proof landing. Mira confirmed production could expand without sacrificing safety or allowing counterfeit components, as criminal grief deepened. The empire required attention, and Ethan left the estate after giving investigators complete access, with public consequences spreading. Behind him, Victor remained seated under the portrait while Celeste entered a waiting vehicle, while criminal proof landed. Neither carried the name's power outside because Ethan had separated identity from legal ownership, as public authority remained. By evening, every Harrington emblem disappeared from the estate, companies, aircraft, and charitable foundations, while public consequences spread. Ethan retained his mother's portrait and transferred historically valuable objects into an independent trust, with undeniable consequences spreading. Everything purchased through fraud, debt, or stolen funds entered liquidation under court supervision, as lasting authority remained. Victor moved into supervised care funded at the minimum legal standard required for dignity, with lasting judgment hardening. Celeste entered a modest rented room after jewels, properties, and hidden accounts were seized, with criminal judgment hardening. She spent the following years reading reports about Vale Meridian's expansion without appearing inside them, while public authority remained. Damen faced fraud, coercion, market manipulation, conspiracy, forgery, and murder proceedings, with undeniable judgment hardening. His former allies competed to testify first after discovering cooperation might reduce their own sentences, as final authority remained. The nurse entered protection and accepted responsibility for the medication alteration under a negotiated agreement, while lasting proof landed. The handwriting expert, security company managers, and paid witnesses surrendered records once Damen stopped paying, with lasting authority remaining. His expensive legal team fractured, with several attorneys withdrawing after frozen retainers could not clear, while lasting judgment hardened. The trial replayed the grand hall beating, false accusation, forged will, and hospital recording, as final proof landed. Guests who once laughed claimed shock and insisted they had misunderstood everything happening before them, as undeniable authority remained. Video evidence showed otherwise, but social shame remained weaker than criminal liability, with public proof landing. Damen attempted to testify and turned every answer into another display of entitlement, with criminal authority remaining. He described himself as rightful heir while admitting Ethan's mother never granted that status, while public consequences spread. Prosecutors asked why he needed forgery if the inheritance truly belonged to him, with undeniable authority remaining. The question reduced his entire defense to silence before jurors who had already heard his voice, while public judgment hardened. He was convicted across the central charges and received a sentence ensuring decades behind concrete walls, with undeniable grief deepening. No family attended the transfer hearing, and Victor refused every request for public support, with public consequences spreading. Celeste denied interviews and claimed illness whenever reporters asked about her son's actions, while lasting proof landed. Damen entered prison believing influence would eventually return, but his remaining accounts disappeared through restitution, as lasting grief deepened. Former partners treated his calls as contamination, and political friends forgot his name, with criminal grief deepening. He died years later without property, title, family, or anyone willing to arrange a private burial, as lasting judgment hardened. The market remembered him only as the man destroyed by the Northstar short squeeze, as public consequences spread. Ethan never visited, sent messages, or requested information after the conviction became final, with criminal consequences spreading. Punishment no longer required attention, once the person had lost the ability to affect his world. As final grief deepened, Northstar became the foundation of a global preservation network operating across medicine and food, while public authority remained. Hospitals stopped losing critical treatments during outages, while laboratories protected irreplaceable research as undeniable proof landed. Farmers gained storage power that reduced forced sales and broke exploitative seasonal pricing, while criminal grief deepened. Regional governments negotiated with Vale Meridian carefully because infrastructure dependence created balanced leverage as lasting proof landed. Marcus continued building systems no large corporation had believed possible when he faced liquidation, with final grief deepening. Mira turned compact units into modular networks deployable across ships, aircraft, and remote communities, while lasting consequences spread. Gabriel guarded liquidity, counterparty risk, and employee protections as the empire crossed borders, with lasting consequences spreading. Lena devoted her career to exposing hidden financial crimes resembling those she once supported, with final consequences spreading. Authority allocation sharpened each trusted leader without replacing their judgment or independence, as lasting consequences spread. Vale Meridian hired discarded professionals, failing founders, and engineers whose value markets misunderstood, with final proof landing. Ethan never confused damaged reputation with worthless ability after watching Damen weaponize public perception, while criminal judgment hardened. Every acquisition followed the same principle his mother taught before wealth entered their lives, as public grief deepened. Appearances changed quickly, but underlying value waited patiently for someone capable of recognizing it, as criminal consequences spread. The God-tier investor system expanded, offering opportunities across energy, medicine, transport, and communications, with public authority remaining. Ethan selected sectors based on strategic resilience rather than vanity or public excitement, while undeniable proof landed. He purchased unglamorous infrastructure before crises made its importance obvious to everyone, as criminal authority remained. Analysts repeatedly called his choices irrational until profits forced them to rewrite their explanations, while criminal proof landed. Those dismissed assets became case studies taught as miracles inside the institutions that ignored them, as lasting authority remained. Ethan accepted neither the praise nor the mythology, knowing each victory came from structure and timing, as undeniable grief deepened. Markets began moving whenever Vale Meridian entered, even when its position remained partially hidden, while final consequences spread. Governments requested partnership, competitors requested mercy, and distressed founders requested private meetings, as public judgment hardened. Ethan never called himself a hero because some companies needed closure rather than rescue, as public proof landed. He invested where value could survive, people could build, and control created lasting advantage, as criminal judgment hardened. Where fraud consumed everything useful, he dismantled the structure without sentimental attachment, with criminal proof landing. Where frightened workers carried healthy operations, he protected them from executive punishment, as criminal grief deepened. His reputation became cold but reliable, a combination more valuable than charm in dangerous markets, while undeniable consequences spread. The Harrington estate remained under Vale Meridian control after every stolen emblem and luxury entered legal review, while criminal consequences spread. Ethan preserved his mother's portrait because it represented the only legacy inside those walls worth keeping, as final judgment hardened. He recovered every asset named in the original will, then multiplied their value beyond recognition, as final proof landed. Financial journals studied his early purchases as miracles after previously dismissing every one of them, while lasting authority remained. Governments negotiated carefully, hospitals relied on Northstar, and markets reacted whenever Vale Meridian appeared, with lasting judgment hardening. Ethan remained exactly what suffering made him: cold, practical, patient, and impossible to deceive twice, with public grief deepening. He never spoke about justice, called himself a hero, or pretended revenge had purified him, while final authority remained. The investor system preserved the completed revenge record while his attention moved toward building lasting value, with lasting authority remaining. Years passed before Ethan returned alone to the highest room of the estate at night, with final judgment hardening. The city glittered beneath the windows, connected by routes and facilities Vale Meridian now controlled, with quiet memory enduring. Behind Ethan hung his mother's portrait, restored but unchanged from the night of his humiliation, as restored purpose remained. On the desk rested the original will beside the grocery receipts he recovered from storage. Those faded papers mattered more than every trophy, contract, and valuation displayed elsewhere. They preserved the earliest investment lessons, written before his mother possessed meaningful capital. Ethan opened the will and reread the section, leaving him every private asset. He had recovered each one, then multiplied their combined value beyond anything she imagined. Still, the money no longer represented victory because the person who intended protection remained absent. The investor system appeared with a final archived message regarding the completed revenge objective. It offered to close the record containing Damen's trades, choices, probabilities, and collapse sequence. Ethan opened the portfolio one last time, not from longing but from disciplined review. Every step toward ruin had looked like victory when Damen made it. He borrowed because applause rewarded expansion and ignored the weakness beneath collateral. He attacked Northstar because weakness seemed safer to exploit than genuine value was to understand. He forged the will because possession looked easier than earning his mother's trust. He murdered her because control mattered more than the life standing between him and inheritance. None of those actions had been unavoidable, and Ethan had never forced the first decision. The system supplied information, but Damen supplied the greed required to complete every trap. That distinction mattered because power had not created the enemy. It merely removed his protection. Ethan closed the archived portfolio, and the crimson lines surrounding Damen's name disappeared. For the first time, the revenge existed only as history rather than an active calculation. The room felt quieter after the interface faded, leaving rain touching the windows gently. Ethan remembered waking beneath the overpass believing every form of justice had been purchased. He had been partially correct, because money could silence witnesses and decorate lies. Yet capital followed intelligence, patience, courage, and structure when someone refused to surrender judgment. Damen inherited wealth and transformed it into debt because ownership exceeded his understanding. Ethan inherited understanding and transformed almost nothing into an empire capable of protecting millions. The contrast completed his mother's final lesson more perfectly than any courtroom judgment. A person could steal assets without acquiring the discipline that made those assets valuable. Likewise, losing money could not erase knowledge, timing, relationships, or the ability to rebuild. Ethan placed the original will inside a secure drawer but kept the grocery receipts on the desk. They reminded him that every enormous structure begins with someone learning to read small numbers honestly. Marcus sent a late report confirming another rural hospital had joined the preservation network. Mira attached improved energy results, while Gabriel confirmed employee funds remained fully protected. Lena added evidence from a separate fraud investigation unrelated to the Harrington family. The Empire continued working without demanding Ethan relive the pain that created its beginning. He approved the reports, delegated the next decisions, and closed the system dashboard for the night. Outside, the Harrington name had vanished from the tower his mother once rescued. Vale Meridian's name appeared there instead, not as a monument to revenge but durable value. Ethan never erased his stepfamily from history or rewrote himself as an innocent saint. He recorded what happened accurately, including every compromise, calculation, and cold decision he made. Truth required no flattering performance when the structures built afterward could defend themselves. The estate lights dimmed automatically as midnight passed over the city. Ethan stood before his mother's portrait and thanked her without speaking aloud. She had left him an inheritance, but more importantly, she had taught him how wealth actually worked. The fortune she created had once been stolen through forged paper and purchased testimony. The vision she created survived every kick, accusation, empty account, and night above the butcher shop. That vision turned a dying warehouse into strategic infrastructure and discarded people into trusted leaders. It turned Damen's strongest weapon, borrowed confidence, into the chain that pulled down his empire. Ethan had not recovered his old life because returning to weakness and trust was impossible. Instead, he built a life where nobody could erase truth simply by making lies more expensive. The system asked whether the host wished to begin another revenge objective. Ethan declined, because his future no longer required enemies to provide direction. He looked across the city his investments helped keep supplied, connected, and prepared. Damen stole an inheritance, but Ethan proved the greatest fortune was the judgment no thief could ever possess.